Trafficking prostituted children happens everywhere, everywhere. I've never been in a community where something isn't going on.
It's not easy if you have a pimp to just say, okay, enough is enough, I'm gone. It doesn't happen like that. Women lose their lives walking away.
So when we see them as truly victims instead of criminals, then we begin to interact with them in ways that are more caring and more understanding.
How do you deal with somebody that's not happy to see you, that's deceptive, uncooperative, maybe outright hostile? That's the challenge to law enforcement. That's the challenge to police officers.
This is a crime that is happening every day here. Every day there's recruitment, multiple times over. Every day that there's another woman or young lady being victimized through sexual exploitation.
As law enforcement, the more we know about sex trafficking, the more we can do to identify and help the victims, as well as hold the traffickers accountable and put them behind bars. This video provides a basic awareness of what sex trafficking is and why it's such an important issue for all of us to understand. It's an issue that has received a lot of attention, but it's very different than most people realize. Sex trafficking occurs when one person obtains another to sell them for sex in exchange for money or something of value, such as food, shelter, or drugs. Sex trafficking is essentially prostitution involving a third person, usually a trafficker or pimp. Through its groundbreaking safe harbor law, Minnesota has taken an aggressive stand to protect young people, the most vulnerable victims of this crime.
These are kids that are maybe stigmatized or already separated from their peer group, and that makes them more susceptible to being recruited by a trafficker, by someone who's going to try to make them, trick them into feeling that they are special.
Sex trafficking is just one form of sexual exploitation, which also includes stripping, pornography, and survival sex. Trafficking doesn't have to involve crossing state or national borders, and under state law, there's no requirement that traffickers use force or coercion against their victims. Victims may even seem to consent, but that's not a defense.
People think of sex trafficking as being something where women are being brought from overseas, or there's like a gun being held to their head or whatever else. And that's simply not true. Under Minnesota law, sex trafficking is simply obtaining somebody for the purposes of prostituting them. The trafficking part is exchanging sex for something else.
Trafficking is big business. A single victim may easily generate $10,000 a month, and the trafficker keeps it all. Even though pimping is often glamorized in popular culture, the reality is that traffickers are criminals who sell vulnerable people.
Traffickers are people that are willing to, for whatever reason, they're willing to use coercion, violence, lies, sometimes love as a tool to manipulate, to exploit and violate a victim. And it doesn't, skin color doesn't matter, age doesn't matter. We've had them come from virtually any walk of life, whether it's rural or urban or suburban across our state.
Sex traffickers are masters at mind games and manipulating victims into doing whatever they want. They do so through an emotional bonding process based on 4 T's: targeting, tricking, turning, and traumatizing. Traffickers start by targeting young people who are already vulnerable. They may be on the run or estranged from their families, or may have disabilities or a history of molestation or abuse.
Traffickers, pimps are very good at seeing the vulnerability in a child. They see the girl who's alone, they see the kid on the street on the corner, they see someone hanging around outside late at night, they see someone alone in the mall, they see the stress, they see the loneliness.
Vulnerable victims can be found everywhere, at schools, at bus stops, and malls, and anywhere in the state with an internet connection. Social media has made it easier than ever to recruit young people.
That's where a lot of young people are meeting these guys, and these suspects are grooming these young women before they even realize it. And we talk to a lot of young people and we ask the females, well, how'd you meet this person? I met him on Facebook. We arranged to meet at a certain location, and that's how I met him.
After contact is made, traffickers pretend to be interested in the victim romantically. Vulnerable victims may never have experienced this attention before.
This young person is very flattered by the attention, flattered by being treated like an adult and being told, "You're beautiful, I love you." And they're filling a niche somehow in the child's life that's missing. So it starts out usually very well, and then it turns.
Once a young victim is emotionally bonded to her trafficker, he talks her into turning her first trick. For most victims, that first experience is devastating.
People don't, I think, understand that the relationship between a trafficker and their victim is very much like a domestic violence relationship where a lot of power and control tactics are someone submissive.
He brought me back to his house and I sat there with his son while he went to go run errands or something. And during that time, he had a friend who paid him for me to go have sex with him. I was afraid. I didn't really know what was going on. It was because of a one-time thing. And that's when the beatings start.
Sex with strangers for money, with all of it paid to the trafficker, is a hellish experience. A victim will see 5, 10, 20 men each day to meet a quota and avoid beatings.
It's a miracle I'm alive. He played Russian roulette with me several times. He put a gun in my mouth.
Victims are isolated from friends and family, both by the trafficker and by their own shame at what they are experiencing. For many, the continual abuse results in trauma bonding.
Trauma bonding is very much like Stockholm Syndrome, which means that the victim attaches herself or himself to the trafficker. And to the degree that even at the end of it all, they will still defend their trafficker.
Another consideration is the fact that a majority of trafficking victims have been sexually abused as children, resulting in a history of unhealthy relationships. Rowena Matthews' early years were a blur, filled with neglect, rapes, and beatings, starting at age 6 when she was molested by a family member. When she and her brothers went to live with their grandparents in the small town of Litchfield, Minnesota, she thought she would be safe.
We had a big old house to come to and could depend on my grandparents.
Still coping with the effects of long-lasting abuse, she struggled with school and her life at home. When her estranged mother asked her to move in with her, Rowena thought it was a chance to start over.
Well, then one day, my mom, she put the crack pipe to my mouth, and then she told me to go in the room with the older man that she was taking care of. And I performed oral sex on him for $35. So my mom became my pimp and my drug dealer.
Her life centered around drugs and prostitution for at least 10 years. Her history with abusive men made her the perfect target for a trafficker.
It was like love at first sight. He was beautiful, he was caring, he was sweet. Then he started becoming abusive and manipulative. He was very narcissistic. I remember driving in the car with him and just him smacking me so hard because I wouldn't do what he asked me to do. And that day, I just remember seeing all my morals and values and standards fly out the window.
For Rowena, every day brought an endless cycle of drugs, working the streets, and violence at the hands of her pimp.
That right there made me know that the world wasn't safe and that I had no room for it and that I need to keep going on until somebody kills me or I kill myself. And that's how I lived.
When Rowena herself became a mother, her childhood memories of abuse and abandonment came back. She made the difficult decision to seek help. Today, she is a champion for other victims of sex trafficking.
This is Rowena. How may I help you?
When Rowena looks back at her life, she's in awe of her biggest role of all, survivor.
I eventually graduated, and that was a beautiful moment because for the first time in my life, I got to wear a cap and gown. And I got a certificate. And the certificate to me meant that I was human and that I'm loved and that I'm worth something.
Every survivor story is a reminder that sex trafficking is around us every day, hidden in plain sight. It can be a matter of looking at a routine situation in a different way.
We see a lot of our traffickers being embedded in a larger pattern of criminal activity, that this isn't, they're not just a pimp, they're not just a trafficker. They do a variety of things. They may be involved with drugs, they may have gang connections, weapons, different things like that.
Often, trafficking is hidden in other cases encountered by law enforcement, including assault or even credit card fraud or shoplifting.
You'd be amazed at how many times we look back on a case historically, and we go back 5, 6, 7 years, and we can identify all the contacts that these victims have had, oftentimes in the presence of their trafficker, with law enforcement. And it's been written up as a domestic assault, it's been written up as a crim sex conduct, it's been written up as other things. We need to be aware of that.
Trafficking occurs just about everywhere, from homes and hotels to ice fishing houses and the Duluth Harbor. It occurs at truck stops, freeway hubs, and anywhere with an internet connection, making the problem as prevalent in greater Minnesota as it is in the Twin Cities.
Our victims, they come from everywhere. Southeast Minnesota is, right now we're finding out, it's the pipeline between Chicago and the oil fields of North Dakota. We'll find our girls, will advertise all over. We're finding very transient, very here 2 days, 3 days at most if they're from out of town, and then they're gone.
Cell phones, prepaid credit cards, and sites like Backpage.com make it easy for traffickers to do business anywhere in Minnesota.
Social media, it's a place where they can hide. It's also a place where the recruitment happens. 8 years ago, online, if you're looking at Craigslist or one of the other areas where you would find this type of activity, it was all combined into one general space, but now it's so prevalent that each city in the state or each geographic area has their own section within those websites.
Nearly every day, law enforcement encounters situations that may involve sex trafficking. Here's what you can do right now to address this issue in your community. Shift your mindset. Young people who are sold for sex are not prostitutes, they're victims. Keep an eye out for sex trafficking, from a traffic stop to a domestic abuse call, especially when vulnerable people are involved. Assess the situation and ask questions. Treat victims with respect and patience, whether or not they are ready to disclose or cooperate. They've experienced a life of trauma and abuse.
It's easy for us to say that it's a funding issue or it's a manpower issue, but some of the biggest challenges that we have is just getting the public to perceive this as an actual crime that's happening right now.
None of us are experts, not child welfare professionals, not law enforcement, not prosecutors. We are all learning more about this every single day, with every single case, with every single situation and scenario.
And as officers, people always come to you with all kinds of questions, and they expect you to have answers. So all of this is a learning process for all of us. You can't always win all your battles, but down the line, you better figure out some kind of way to win the war, that's for sure.
As an officer on the front lines, you have the opportunity to make a positive connection and gain a victim's trust. It's not going to be easy, but in the long run, it's worth it. Coming up in the next video, understanding victims of sex trafficking.
Everybody that they've ever trusted has betrayed them. Everybody that has told them, I'm going to take care of you, this is going to be a new beginning for you, has turned it around and has used that to exploit them.
What makes victims vulnerable?
They've been led to believe by the victimizer that they won't be believed. They're led to believe by the victimizer that they themselves will be arrested or charged with a crime.
And how to identify a trafficking situation.
It's not any one particular item of evidence that's going to stand alone. It's going to be the accumulation of a whole bunch of different things that are going to be found in that room.